Are you willing to accept Christ's invitation to know Him more intimately, love Him more intensely, and follow Him more closely, and then go out into the world and live His good news? If you say yes, then you could be the 13th apostle. Join Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey, the odd couple of Catholic radio, as they ride the radio waves 2 by 2 to share the goodness, beauty, and truth of Jesus Christ and His church. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the 13th apostle.
Nyansa, an Akan word that means wisdom, a virtue that is acquired through intentional learning and experience. So this is the whole person learning, involving head, heart, and soul. Would that we could have that as the basis for every school's curriculum. Welcome back, friends, to another episode of the 13th Apostle, where we explore the good, beautiful, and true of the Catholic faith and the Catholic Church. And we know that God's creation is not limited by our sacraments or the Bible. God's responsible for everything good. And in this episode, we're going to talk about something that's very good. And I've read the 3 words as part of our tagline, good, beautiful, and true, associated with this program that's based on this word. So, Sarah Scudder, welcome to the 13th Apostle.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Okay. So you were telling me before, and this is a program. This is let's say the most important part of this program, and that should be you saying that. So what would you say? This is a program that combines classical education in the Christian or Judeo-Christian tradition. So tell us about that.
Yes. So Nyansa was originally began with its founder, Dr. Angel Parham, who was running her own after-school program in New Orleans. And through using classical texts like the Odyssey and Greek mythology and the Iliad, along with Bible stories and artwork, she found that she was really resonating with the children in the inner city area where she was and where she was ministering. When that shut down because of COVID, she had the idea of taking the curriculum that she had taught for those years and creating kind of a curriculum that she could then utilize in other areas of the country if people wanted to start their own after-school programs or to incorporate it in their classical schools or in their homeschooling groups. And so I met Dr. Angela Parham about 4 or 5 summers ago. She had come to a program where I was getting my master's in classical education and kind of presented her work. And I kind of fell in love with it because I live in Philadelphia myself and work with a lot of children in under-resourced areas where we live and where our church is, and knew that there had been this great disconnect between what I saw our youth was struggling with academically, but then the academic struggle was then pouring over into the spiritual life, right? Of us being able to minister to them or to just teach Bible lessons because of the lack of what they were learning in school. It was becoming this barrier. And so I really wanted to find something that could help connect them academically to then make the bridge for spiritual conversation. So finding Nyansa was really a lifeline for us. And then Dr. Angel Parham asked me to join her in kind of creating more curriculum. And so I've been working with Nyansa for the last 4 years, helping to build more of that curriculum using classical texts and Bible stories and artwork and Latin vocabulary to specifically reach under-resourced areas and kids who might never set foot in a classical school, but have this opportunity to have classical experience, classical education experience in an after-school setting. So that's what I've done for the last few years. And we're currently in our 3rd year in an after-school program here in Philadelphia. And it's just been amazing to kind of see that work take place.
That's beautiful. So many thoughts came to mind, writing a couple of notes down about that. And the classical education, take a minute or so to explain that to our audience.
Yeah, so classical education has a very rich tradition that spans from ancients to medieval, and just a way of learning that is embodied, that is holistic, integrated, between subjects, and the idea that we look at the tradition that was kind of passed down from us. And so we do go back to the classic texts of the Odyssey and the Iliad and Shakespeare, and looking at that rich tradition that has been passed down to us, and then helping students to kind of cultivate that so that they can continue on in that tradition. But Nyansa is great because we also look for the women's voices and the minority voices who have contributed to those conversations all throughout, and highlight those for some of our students who are minorities or don't necessarily always see themselves in that tradition, but historically have been. And so we marry those things together and kind of present it in this way of showing them that they have a place in the tradition that's continuing on, while also giving them classic works that are referenced in our current society, things that if you didn't know them, you'd be kind of lost and kind of be like kind of on a road without a map. So we kind of provide both of those things and marry those things together to kind of help them find their place in the tradition.
What you said toward the end of that, things that they have to know, that people have to know for like a common currency, right?
Yes.
In the culture, and to hear references about this or that aspect, that builds a community, deepens the understanding and appreciation of life. And it made me think of a book that came out, I think in the late 80s or maybe the early 90s. There were actually two by this professor and researcher, Cultural Literacy by Dr. E.D. Hirsch. In a way, it was a call to action to say, this is the common threads throughout at least the Western tradition. And I want to say beyond that, because so much of the cultures of the world use this, I'll use that word again, they use this currency. So law, the whole idea of law, of justice, due process, the dignity of women, again, the dignity of all in the ancient world, certainly in, let's say, at the time of Christ, there wasn't much of a distinct, race was not the way it is and it has been for a while. And I think that it makes me go to your point about, with the minorities. Christianity, for a significant period of time, was an African church. It was an African faith. I mean, some of the giants in our faith tradition, Tertullian, Cyprian, Athanasius,
Justin.
Origin, yes, and it's right, and probably well, I don't think it's arguable that Augustine is the greatest of that. That the Europeans didn't get involved, that deeply involved for probably several hundred years, almost 1,000 years. So that's something that most people, when I first learned that years ago, it was a wake-up call, And so they have a legacy. That's one thing. They're not adrift, and that's one of the things, as I've read about your program, I saw that this is a way to have them understand that they're a leaf on a branch that's connected to this tree and all this long root system. So talk a little bit about that whole idea,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, that's one of our biggest goals in the curriculum that we're writing, in the places that we're trying to target, that we're trying to get into. I always kind of give an illustration. There's a famous portrait. I think the last name is the Fry family, and there was kind of like a special documentary that was done on a few years ago. And this family discovered this portrait of a family, and they noticed that there was kind of looked like there was a figure that had been covered up. And so they take it to a restorer, and they uncover that in the portrait was a slave boy who had been a part of the family portrait, who had been painted over for years. And it passed down from family to family, and no one had even known until they uncover. And then they were able to kind of
Oh,
go back and research and find out history of this important boy who had been a part of this family and had played with the children and been a part of this family and had been covered up for so many years. And I use that always as an illustration of what we're trying to do, as far as, often we might get pushback. What I use is an illustration to just show that in our history, too often people have covered up what has historically always been. And what we are trying to do is to uncover what the voices that have already been there, and then making exactly what you said, the link to show that you are a leaf on the branch of this humongous trunk that goes down in so many roots that all of us are a part of. And sadly, through certain circumstances, sometimes those truths have not been discussed or uncovered or, been covered up. And so it's our goal to not just bring in minority voices just to bring them in to show diversity, but to show that those voices have been there all along. And we can find this common ground to show that it is this inherited just treasure trove of tradition that is for all of us and that we've all been a part of. And that it even affects the little boys and girls who come to our inner city Philadelphia group, who some are immigrants and some are from single parent homes and some have lived in Philadelphia all their lives and some have not. But there's something that we can gather around that's bigger than ourselves, and we can study it and we can learn from it and be connected to the people around us, not just our immediate surroundings, but to the past, and to find their place in that, whether it's art or history or even in scripture passages, right? We all have this inheritance that we share.
It's beautiful. And I love that word. First of all, I love the story about the painting. And I love the concept of uncovering. It's in a way, it is a revelation, but it's a revelation. It's an uncovering of something that exists, that existed. And I love the word recollection. To break it apart, though, to recollect. So you had it. I mean, Plato believed that all knowledge was somehow in our soul and we had to uncover it. Whether or not that's true, the idea, and certainly using that as a teaching method, is a beautiful thing to say, we're going to do some recollection. And what does that mean? Okay, we're going to collect what we had before, but we didn't know we had it. So we're going to recollect that. And I think that sometimes it's very frustrating. And actually got frustrated the more I read about, is it pronounced Nyansa?
Nyansa.
Nyansa, okay. And I thought, which is probably my last comment in the intro, was we are missing so much in our educational system, and doesn't matter. It's like so many things. There's layer upon layer of inefficiencies, and we throw money at it, and so much of that money is wasted. It's not just in education. Unfortunately, we do it in so much is one of the reasons why we're nearly $40 trillion in debt as a nation. But I think of the type of student, the type of child that you have in your program. And first of all, they're being exposed to things that students in the public school program are not being exposed to. And is that your main student? Is it a public school student? What kind of motivation do they have? I don't know how they start. You're going to tell us how they start in your program, the parent or parents. Then why do they stay?
Yeah.
So.
Great question. So for Nyansa specifically, we have been able to kind of reach, our main goal is to kind of do the after school type program. However, we have seen a huge increase in homeschooling parents who want to approach classical education this way, of giving voice to different groups and hearing how that tradition fits into place. So we have that. We also have some classical schools who have kind of taken our curriculum to help supplement things that they've already taught or are teaching. So that's kind of just been a great way to diversify, really just get our curriculum out there and have people understand what we're about. So that's been wonderful. I personally have just made it my mission to do after school. I teach in a classical hybrid model school 2 days a week that my children attend, and seeing what they have learned and how classical education has just had such an impact on them personally, I wanted to bring what I could to the children in our neighborhood in any way that I could. So when we started our after school program, we went to back to school nights in our local public schools. We also set up kind of a school supply giveaway outside of our church to kind of bring parents and students to kind of come by and meet us. And then we just kind of would sign up students through that as an after school program. We only meet twice a week, so it's a little hard to have students. We have a lot of parents who would love to bring them to our program, but they need kind of 5-day-a-week care. And so that's, so we're very specific. We don't have a ton of students, but parents who bring the students to us love the idea of having their children have homework help, but also just learning something new. A lot of times people think of parents in inner city failing public schools that they somehow don't care or that they are uninvolved in their children's lives. What we found a lot is that parents feel very just inept or unable, powerless to really do anything about the condition of the public school or what's happening there. So they are very happy to put them in a program that is teaching their children some kind of academic skill. So that first hour that we meet, we help them with homework. We also run some literacy kind of stations and some math stations to kind of help them build skills that they desperately need. And then the rest of the time, we split up into classes and we study the Bible. We study, this year we studied the Odyssey, and then some Latin, which is very much more vocabulary. They learn some vocabulary words, which teach them roots to English words. So that's been very successful to just give them a link to the vocabulary that they're hearing around them. And
Yes.
that's tied to Aesop's fables. So they kind of hear a fable and then they learn some vocabulary. And that has just been what brings them initially is just after school program. Every parent understands what after school program is, and they want their kid to kind of learn some more. So they bring them. I think what keeps them coming, the children, a lot of times parents kind of get tired of bringing them and sometimes they miss, and it's the kids who beg them to bring them back and they want to come. And I think partially one is just it's a small group, and how often are you in a class of 5 or 6 kids? Most of the time in public school you're in a class of 35 or 40, and so to get that one-on-one attention, we love them and they know that we love them. And I think that's a big draw, that they feel seen, they feel loved, they feel paid attention to and listened to. When we talk about the Odyssey, we're asking these open-ended questions that their opinion actually matters. In hearing the stories, they don't have to be on a certain reading skill or reading level or comprehension level to engage. They can just hear the story and have their opinions about characters and what justice is and the virtue for the week, or why did this God make this decision? And they can talk about that and feel like they have something to contribute. And so I think that's a huge pull for a lot of these kids that they don't have with, in the school day.
As I was reading some of the curriculum, I think you sent 3, I thought of the Christian practice of Lectio Divina and certainly Saint Ignatius' spiritual exercises, where you put yourself into, now in this context, what that I'm talking about is sacred scripture, but it doesn't have to be. It's you're hearing a story, you're reading a story, whatever it is. What do you smell?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What if you're in Jesus' time? Okay, there's an olive tree. What does that olive taste like? What is would you hear the sounds of the wheels on that grinding on the sand and the stone and whatnot, the voices that you're in the marketplace, whatever it is, each sense you bring into that, you become part of that scene, and all of a sudden you, instead of knowing about something, you start to know something, right? And I think that's what I gathered with reading some of the curricula, that you get that's the whole person involved in that. You said the questions are open-ended. I imagine you're trying to stimulate the imagination of the children.
Yes, very much so. And trying to, yes, what you said exactly, an embodied kind of poetic knowledge experience of what is it like to be in that story on some level, but also we help them kind of stimulate their imagination by acting it out. So we rely a lot on, can you tell that story back? Can you write a paragraph of what maybe you would feel like it would be there? And then we also put on costumes and have them act out, passages of scripture or parts of the Odyssey, and understanding not just because I read it or heard it and we just happened to do some reading comprehension questions about it, but really kind of getting into, well, what are they feeling and how would you feel if this happened to
Mm.
you? How would you feel if your father had been away for 20 years and now you're seeing him, right? So having this understanding, it's just been really eye-opening to me to see how far the kids get. You have an expectation of, okay, I'm going to share this. I don't know that they'll be into it. I'm not sure how much they'll get from it. And then to see them kind of surpass that and to really dig in and have it affect them has been it's been a great experience.
So you said we're talking about the Odyssey, and how would you feel about, if your father were away for 20 years? It really begs the question, knowing where you were in the inner city and whatnot, do you have students who don't have a father in their life?
We do. There's one girl in the program who she lost her mother a couple years ago and doesn't have her father. She lives with her grandmother. And it's just one of the most joyful girls that we have in the program. So intelligent, so smart. But so often she connects with some of the things that we read. And she's very open about, if someone was bullying her at school or how she felt. We have a lot of images of the gods and goddesses that are purposely drawn in such a way that represent different minorities. And so often she's an African American young lady. And so she identifies so much. She sees the gods and goddesses painted or drawn in a way that looks like her. And she often makes that comment. I think there was one time she pointed to one of them and she said, that reminds me of my mom. And
Mm.
just being able to connect with those stories so deeply, we do see tragedy and some harsh things that they're going through, and they feel very comfortable and open in sharing them and telling us very much so what's happening in their life. And I do think the discussion opens them up to do that.
Well, that makes sense since you emphasized earlier about the love that is given and, of course, greatly received. There's never too much of that. To be able to marry that with a lesson, again, okay, here's an intellectual task. Okay. So I wonder whether the love just exudes from you and the other staff or whatnot, other teachers, or where there's some intentionality about that. And it makes me think of another marrying, so to speak, which is I read somewhere in my research for this, singing mathematics.
Oh, yeah. So that's our group. Yeah. So I teach them skip counting and I put it to music. We skip count together normally at the beginning of our time. A lot of the kids have come to us very, like their skills were very wanting. For basic addition or multiplication, they were using tally marks to kind of count up and to do the math. And so we kind of took that head on and said, no, we're going to teach you some basic math skills. And so many kids come back to us and say, I had my math test today and I was singing the fives or I was singing the skip counting of threes and it helped me, through this test. So really anything that the kids need, we try to look for how can we meet them where they are, bring them a little further. A lot of the kids are not super consistent in coming. We have a lot of no-shows, but what can we do with the time that we have 2 days a week for 3 hours? What can we do in that time that helps them just take the next step forward?
That's it right there. Take the next step you don't meet them where they are and stay there. You
Yeah.
move forward. That should be the principle of life and certainly of our faith. That I mean, we always talk about accompaniment and Jesus met them where they were, but the whole point of him being here was not to stay where you are, right? And to move forward. When I was shortly after my father's death in the 80s, I came upon a old leather notebook, school notebook of his, and I still have it. And I saw these. He was of that generation where they didn't talk that much about certainly about, a lot of things. They were just too busy living and dealing with children and other things. But I learned so much from my father about my father from that leather notebook, and but a lot of it was the classical tradition, the notes in there. And I in my book that I wrote, that it was very humbling to read that because a lot of the stuff that I was reading in there, I'd not learned. And so that was in 1985, and I made it a goal to, or at least an objective and a principle of my life to continue to learn kind of based on that. It really inspired me to do that. And again, it was in the classical tradition, and I did not know until after his death and coming upon that leather notebook.
It's amazing.
So going back to the uncovering and
Mm.
that painting, we have these preconceived notions, and that so often locks us into a certain way of thinking and acting and in our lives. And we think we know something or know somebody, and then all of a sudden, wow, we find out from another experience that we didn't know them. And it is absolutely true that you don't know somebody until you walk a mile in the moccasins. You've shared an experience with them. So often it's bad experience. It's, suffering is the great equalizer and should be, the great teacher. Mary Magdalene she has an image that I've spent some time over the last several years trying to dispel, that the interpretation by the church writ large, that she was the sinful woman, and that meant she was a sexual sinful woman. And there's nothing in sacred scripture about that. And I've noticed in when many paintings, she either has her head down, or it's almost like a little bit of shame that the painter portrayed.
Mm.
But it's based on misinformation to think, okay, well, this is the way, this is Mary Magdalene. Well, no, you got to put aside the way you think you've learned something, right? And let's say, as you said, and then let's move forward to the truth, as you described in that painting. A wrap up for you and for our audience. What do you want to say? And does Nyansa accept any donations?
Great. I would say if you are ever interested in starting a program, it does not have to be big. It does not have to cost money. It just takes a couple of volunteers and some willing students. We have our curriculum that's available on Amazon for you. You can go on Amazon, look up Nyansa, and we have our curriculum there. It is designed to plug and play. It is designed to give you every tool you need to start your own group. And we encourage you, if you've ever had that desire, just try. And the joy outlasts any trepidation of starting. It's just a truly wonderful experience. So I would encourage you to look at that. We do take donations. We are a nonprofit, and you can go to nyansaclassicalcommunity.com/donate, or even just go onto the regular webpage and click on the donation page. We would be happy to have your support. But mainly, we want our curriculum out there. And so if you know of anyone who's interested, whether it's teaching homeschool or classical school, or you would like to start your own after school group, we encourage you. We would highly support you and help you through that journey.
Accompaniment. Right there. It's beautiful. Sarah Scudder of Nyansa, thank you so much. This was a real joy. To use your word, this was a real joy to learn about this, and especially the love and the enthusiasm that is clear from what you're saying. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Tom Caffrey, I'm missing my partner Dan, and hope you're okay, Danny boy. The Angelus is coming up next, followed by Peter and Jemmy. And thank you for your support, ladies and gentlemen. A great episode. Nyansa, Nyansa, Virtue of Wisdom. God bless all. God bless you, Sarah.
Thank you for listening to the 13th Apostle with Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey. For more information on Dan, visit his website at www.danduddy.com or email dcduddy@gmail.com. Tom's website is faithpilgrims.com or email trcaffrey@faithpilgrims.com. How about you? Will you be the 13th Apostle?